Okay, welcome WHAP students to what will be chapter 15 for you guys, the resurgence of empire in East Asia. All right, we're going to start off, really we have three dynasties here. We have the Sui dynasty, the Tang dynasty, and the Song dynasty. We're going to start off quickly with the Sui dynasty. You can see it's pretty short-lived there, but they really get the ball rolling for the Tang who follow behind them and the Song after that. Regional kingdoms that succeed the collapse of the Han dynasty from the classical age. You get Yang Jian, who consolidates his control of all of China, and he's the guy who founds the Sui dynasty. And really what the Sui dynasty are known for are their building projects. They used military labor. They used conscripted labor, meaning that you had no choice. They said, congratulations, you're digging a ditch. Congratulations, you're digging a wall, whatever it may be, or building a wall. The biggest accomplishment of the Sui dynasty for sure is the Grand Canal. And what the intention of the Grand Canal is to promote this trade between North and South China, because most of the rivers run out of the Himalaya mountains, which are situated in the west. And so the rivers flow west to east. And so they're trying to link the regions of North and the South together. So they're going to build a canal that flows along with those rivers, but then cut a channel between two of the rivers and connect them. So this links earlier networks of canals, over 1,240 miles worth of them. Roads followed along on either bank. This is huge for commerce and trade, without a doubt. And it is the greatest of the Sui dynasty's accomplishments, and really the only thing you'll need to know them for. Now, following the Sui, you have a little bit longer dynasty, the Tang dynasty, which lasts for around 300 years here. And people just got fed up with the Sui. And again, they were short-lived, and there was discontent because they were forcing you to do all these things. They were conscripting labor. Also, they were losing battles. Korea, the peninsula of Korea, attaches to China, and oftentimes China has gone in there and tried to control Korea and been repelled. This is one of those times. The emperor would end up being assassinated. And the Sui emperor assassinated in 618, and that's when the Tang dynasty is initiated. Now, the second emperor is more of somebody you actually need to know. His name's Tang Taizong. This is a brutal, ruthless. He murders his two brothers. He thrusts aside his father and steals the throne from him. But he's a very strong ruler. He builds a new capital at Chang'an, and with China, the capital moves all over the place. They're always building new ones. He has his empires based off of law and order. Taxes and prices are kept low under his rule, and he was a more effective implementer of earlier Sui policies. What he did was he took what the Sui had and made it better. He was just better at it. Now he's ruthless, and he did terrible things to get his position, but once in power, he was pretty effective. It's the difference between a good man and a great man. Not all great men were good men. So what are the major achievements of the Tang dynasty? Their transportation and communications network was very extensive. They had this awesome postal system. One of the crazier things that they did was the equal field system. You had a lot of land being in the hands of just a few people. They're going to take that away, and they're basically going to redistribute some 80% of the land according to this crazy government formula they had. How big your family was, how fertile your land was. Like if you didn't have very fertile land, then you got more acres. If you had a bigger family, you got more acres. So if you needed more, you got more. It was essentially how it worked. And it does work. It works well for a while until the 8th century. But as things will happen, corruption begins creeping in. Buddhist monasteries begin gobbling up a bunch of the land, and all of a sudden, the system breaks apart. Now, the Tang definitely used this meritocracy, this bureaucracy of merit. The civil service exams are a big part of the Tang dynasty. Their curriculum is based off of Confucius's philosophies. So that's a Confucian educational curriculum. And for the most part, people advance through society through their abilities, which is good. Educational opportunities are widely available. It's why we believe as a nation, the United States of America, that you have to go to school, because we know how important that is to a civilization's power. So they build their loyalty to the dynasty, and the Confucian system remains, and the merit system, the civil service system, remains strong all the way until the early 20th century when China has a civil war with communists and nationalists. Militarily speaking, the Tang will expand China further than it's ever been. The Tang China was a little bit larger than today's China even. As you can see, it goes into Korea. They do take out Korea. They take out Vietnam, which is always very tough. Tibet, the mountains. It's pretty incredible. And what they would do is they would go in and they would establish these tributary relationships where the kings of Korea and the kings of Vietnam would pay them tribute gifts, and for that, China would basically protect them from both China and outside powers. China saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, and as such, they initiated the kowtow ritual, and that is basically, you have to prostrate yourself before the Chinese emperor all the way to the ground, basically kissing the ground several times, touching your forehead to the ground. Makes you look like a worm basically on the ground in front of them. Here you can see a global map of the Tang. I think we'll see a better map here in a second, so we won't spend much time on it. Of course, they decline. It's mandate of heaven here. It's the dynastic cycle. All of them decline at some point or another. In this case, the Tang declined because of governmental neglect. Essentially, the emperor, one of the emperors, became too obsessed with music and his favorite concubine. And so he wasn't doing a good job. He turned a blind eye. And so there was a rebellion under An Lushan, who was a former military commander, who would end up capturing the capital. Eventually, it would be crushed. But to do that, the Tang would invite the Uyghurs, these nomadic groups, sort of like Mongols from Central Asia, from the north, who had often been the enemy, of course. And they would invite their mercenaries in to put down the rebellion. The problem is you invited the wolf to dinner, and the Uyghurs come in and they go ahead and they sack the capital and other important cities. And that really helped put the Tang on the decline. So they have several more rebellions. The last emperor would end up abdicating in 907, which would institute the dynasty that's the most important to us because this course starts in 1200. So really, we're just going to focus mainly on the Song dynasty. Now, the Song dynasty is much smaller than the Tang dynasty. Tang lost a lot of its territory. And Song dynasty put its emphasis on administration, not expansion. So it's sort of similar to how the Abbasids and the Umayyads relationship worked. They're working on industries, making trade items and stuff. They focus on education and the arts, of course. The military is not emphasized. That is a major difference between the Song and the Tang dynasty. The first emperor was Song Taizu. He was a former military leader who was made emperor by his troops. But he institutes a policy of imperial favor for civil servants and expanded the meritocracy. Civil servants are bureaucrats. They're people who run the government. And he's going to expand the exams, and he wants more and more people going up the social ladder based off of their merit. All right, here's a map here with the Song dynasty. And what you'll see, here's the Song, the southern Song. The northern portion of what was once the Song dynasty would fall to a people called the Jurchen, who established the Jin Empire. As you can see, these are going to be Mongolian-type peoples coming in and taking out this part of China. The Tang dynasty, which had stretched all the way out here, they've lost all that. So the Song dynasty is much smaller, but it kind of makes it easier to work with. However, while they expanded the bureaucracy, one of the drawbacks of that was they had far too many people working for the government. And, you paying them decent salaries, and that means that you had to tax people more heavily to pay for them. And so you had several peasant rebellions in the 12th century. And, there's just really you get no movement towards reforming the bureaucracy. You also had another weakness of the Song dynasty was the fact that they put regular people at the head of the military. Like they didn't trust their military, so they wouldn't let generals run the military. They made governmental people run the military who didn't have military training. And so they were unable to contain those nomadic attacks from the north. And so, like I said, the Jurchen would come in and end up conquering a lot of the Song's dynasty in the north. And this would push them into what we kind of call the Southern Song dynasty. All right, agricultural economies of the Tang and Song. They developed. Now, this one's very important. In this time period, Vietnamese fast ripening rice is imported. It's a different strain of rice that grows faster, and so they're able to get twice as many crops. They get 2 crops a year, so twice as much food. Of course, that's going to lead to a population surge. You got some awesome technological innovations in this time period, such as the iron plow, which would allow their harvest to yield better because more seeds are getting planted there. They're using draft animals to do this, oxen and horses and cows and things. Soil fertilization and improved irrigation as well. They got water wheels and canals. All these things are helping their agricultural aspects. They also get terrace farming. In areas where the ground sloped heavily, it was hard to grow things because the water would run off down the slope, basically. When terrace farming, you basically cut them into flat blocks. And you can look up pictures of terrace farming. It'd be a good idea for you to see them. And this helped make them more productive as well. More food equals more population. It'll always be that way. And that's because of this increased agricultural production and a more effective food distribution system. They're getting the food to the people better and more efficiently. And that's something that Tang and Song are both good at. You do get a large part of urbanization, and that's a word you need to know. That's a fast migration to the cities. People are flocking to the cities. Shanghai was the world's most populous city. 2 million people, all the 1,000 years ago, almost 1,000 years ago, and they have 2 million people, so it's incredibly large. And the Southern Song capital of Hangzhou had over 1 million people. So America today, I think, only has 9 cities over 1 million people, just to kind of give you a comparison. Very patriarchal. I've told you this before. The Chinese are very male-dominated. There was an increased emphasis on ancestor worship in this time period, and these rituals were ran by the elder males, and so it gave them more power and prestige in the family. They have these elaborate grave rituals. And all that stuff. This is also a time period where foot binding gains popularity. And what that is, and you need to look up pictures of foot binding. It's disgusting and entertaining at the same time. This would only happen really in the upper classes because foot binding essentially would handicap the young ladies that were forced to do it. And you would take your young daughters and you would put their foot in a shoe that was too small. And always have it in a shoe that's too small. And over time, it would smash their feet in on themselves because the idea was that smaller feet were more attractive. But in reality, it meant that these women were completely dependent upon the men around them. So it's kind of a really crazy and bizarre thing that was not good for women whatsoever. All right. Technology and industry. Porcelain gains ground here in this time period. Chinaware, if you've ever heard the statement like your grandma's good china, it's plates and containers for drinks and stuff, tea, whatever it may be. The Chinese, they have the best and finest in the world, and so they make quite a bit of money off of that. They also increase their iron production due to the use of coke instead of coal in furnaces, which makes their steel better. Now, these days, China's kind of known for cheap steel compared to like really good American steel. But they're making agricultural tools, weaponry. They invent this little thing called gunpowder, sort of a big deal. Changes the world almost as much as anything that's ever been invented. So gunpowder is a big deal. Earlier printing techniques were refined. You get movable type by the mid-11th century. So that's very, very important. You need to make sure you know that, and gunpowder and the stuff that they're trading here. Yet complex Chinese ideographs make woodblock technique easier. So movable type is great, and it works a lot better in English than it does in Chinese. They had good naval vessels. Chinese junk was one of their ships. So they're trading well, and good technology, basically. They do get the emergence of a market economy, which is where it's not a subsistence economy. It's where you go to buy the goods that you need for your home instead of make all the goods for your home. Letters of credit developed to deal with copper and coin shortages, sort of like checks and these promissory notes. I'm good for this amount of money. You can take it at a later date. The development of independently produced paper money. So paper money is another technological innovation of the Tang and the Song. It wasn't as stable. It never is. Good hard currency is always more stable. And there were riots when people didn't honor that money because it is just, again, at the end of the day, a piece of paper. The government claims a monopoly on money production in the 11th century, which makes sense. You can't just have people out there making money, or it results in massive inflation. So you need the government to regulate such a thing. And China is increasingly partaking in a hemispheric economy. They're all over the place over there in the Indian Ocean trade and in the Pacific. The Chinese have an increasingly cosmopolitan nature. Their cities are, there's going to be several languages spoken in their cities. There's going to be multiple religions being worshipped in their cities. They're diverse. Chinese silk opened up trade routes, but this increased local demands for imported luxury goods. So money, money, money. You do get a cultural change in Tang and Song China. Declining confidence in Confucianism after the Han Dynasty collapsed. Remember, the Qin Dynasty had fallen in love with legalism, and the Han had moved towards Confucianism, but the Han Dynasty collapsed, so maybe Confucianism isn't the answer. And so this kind of results in an increase of popularity of the religion of Buddhism, which is an import from India. Buddha himself was Indian, and the religion started there. But it's going to be more popular in China than it is back in India. Christianity, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism from the Persians, and Islam also appear in China. China's a very attractive place to foreigners. Most of these are foreign merchant people it's not like the native Chinese were really turning to Christianity in large numbers or Islam in large numbers. They really weren't, but there were so many people trading with China that you had these cosmopolitan cities. You got Mahayana Buddhism, especially popular in Western China, and it's just a different style of Buddhism. We'll kind of go into more detail on that a little bit later. The growth of Buddhist temples and libraries. Economic success occurs as converts donate land holdings. So Buddhism sort of becomes associated with some wealth. And there was increased popularity through donations of agricultural produce to the poor. So the Buddhists are donating food to the poor. And so that makes them very popular, as you can imagine. Got like an overlap here. I don't know. It's weird. All right. You had some conflicts with Chinese culture. Buddhism was text-based off of these Bodhisattva teachings. I'm not exactly sure what that says underneath it. With an emphasis on ethics and politics. There were metaphysics there going on. Family-centered. The Chinese, so the Chinese put their emphasis on family-centered. The family is the most important aspect of Chinese culture. And filial piety is a term that you need to know, and that's basically loyalty to your family, to the men of your family, filial piety. And China, does have some isolationist to them. There are plenty of times where they don't want to be bothered by other people with their inferior religions and inferior beliefs and stuff like that. Buddhists did adapt to the ideology of Chinese climates. Dharma, which was a Buddhist thing, was translated into Tao, which was, of course, under Taoism. Nirvana was translated to something called Wu Wei. Not super important to remember that. And they accommodated family lifestyle. And what does it mean? It means that Buddhism is changing to become more appealing to the people of China. That's all that means. And eventually you would see persecution of Buddhist, Daoist, and Confucian persecution supported in the late Tang dynasty. By the 840s, there's a systematic closure of Buddhist temples and expulsions. All right, they're getting rid of Buddhist monks. They're expelling Zoroastrians, Christians, Manichaeans as well. There is an economic motive behind this with the government. They're seizing large land holdings. These monasteries had held large land holdings, and they want them, so they're going to boot them out and basically take their land. Neo-Confucianism means new Confucianism, neo meaning new. The Song dynasty refrained from persecuting Buddhists, not like the Tang, but they did favor Confucians over Buddhists. Neo-Confucians were influenced by Buddhist thought. So what is a Neo-Confucianist? It's a mixture of Confucianism and Buddhism. You don't have to remember that philosopher. All right, the Silla dynasty is a Korean dynasty, and they recognize the Tang emperor as their overlord, basically. So they were technically a vassal state, but Koreans were able to maintain their. I mean, Korea's a tough place. You can't just walk in there and beat them up. They're tough. And they were highly independent of the Chinese. However, the Chinese did have a lot of cultural influence on the Koreans, sort of like America has a large cultural influence on the world today. You can see American businesses and products all over the world, and you can watch, American TV stations all over the world. Our culture has been exported. Well, that's how China is as well. Vietnamese adapted to Chinese culture and their technology. They adopted, of course. They resent highly the political domination, the Chinese butting their noses into their business. They see themselves as being very different than the Chinese. And they asserted their independence. They, took advantage of the situation. They asserted their independence when the Tang dynasty ended up falling in the 900s. All right. A little early Japan here too. Chinese armies never invaded Japan. Japan is a good-sized island, 500 miles off the coast of China. But again, the Chinese, their culture has a large impact on Japan. And in that time period of the Tang rule, the Japanese would imitate them in many ways. They would put a Japanese flair to it, but they were stealing a bunch of stuff from the Chinese and modeling after them. You got the establishment of these new capitals and stuff. The Japanese would adopt Confucius teachings and Buddhist teachings, but they would retain their native religion of Shinto. So Shinto and Buddhism are the two big religions in Japan. Under Heian Japan, in this time period you see here, Japanese emperor moves his court to Kyoto, but he's really just a figurehead. You have these warlords called daimyo, who are the real power. In this case, the Fujiwara clan is the real power. And that pattern will remain in Japanese history pretty much forever. A weak emperor, and then you would have a true power behind the throne, whether it's the Fujiwara clan or later on the Tokugawa shogunate. But it does help explain the longevity of the institution. So the imperial family, goes back for like 900 years because who cares? They're not the real power anyway. So there was no sense in overthrowing them. You wouldn't overthrow the emperor. You'd overthrow the Fujiwara clan. Telegenji is one of the more famous Japanese works, but a lot of their teachings and stuff are dominated by Chinese works. Now, shogun, you need to know what that is. Certainly, that's a military dictator. You got civil war through all these clans in Japan. Japan is broken up in all these warring groups, sort of like China in its warring state period. The Minamoto leader was named Shogun in 1185. And again, that's a military dictator. And he rules from Kamakura, but he allowed the imperial throne to continue in Kyoto because he's the power behind the power. He's the real power. Medieval Japan has a lot of similarities to medieval Europe as far as how its social hierarchy is structured. It's very decentralized. That's important. The power is in the hands of these warlords called daimyo. Military authority rested in the hands of the samurai, who are these professional warriors. The samurai would work for the daimyo and protect the peasants who worked on the daimyo's lands, just like a knight would. So a lot of similarities there, and we'll look at the similarities a lot more in class. And then here you can see Japan, Korea. Way down here you see Vietnam. Okay, so it's out there. There's a lot of words and terms you're probably not comfortable with. Just do your best to get comfortable with them and see the big picture here. You have a very short Sui dynasty that really the big thing they do is build the Grand Canal, but they do it too brutally, and so they're overthrown. The Tang come in, and they pick up on the Grand Canal and some of the Sui stuff, make it a little bit better, and they're all about military and expansion. They're going to use the merit system and everything and Confucianism, but they too will make a mistake of inviting northern nomads to help put down rebellions. Stuff's getting expensive, so people are rebelling, and they invite the nomads in, and the nomads pretty much root them out. And we end up, the Song come along, and the Song dynasty will be smaller and more manageable. For sure. Think about all the innovations of the Tang and the Song dynasty. Gunpowder being a big one, paper, movable type. These are all very, very important. They had great naval innovations in this time period as well. They're very advanced. China is as advanced and premier as any place in the world during the Tang and Song dynasties. At times, they are matched by the Muslims, but really nobody else. It's them and the Muslims in this time period. Okay, well, that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully you guys have also skimmed through your chapter, because there's just a lot going on with the Chinese, and we'll look at them a lot closer in class. Thank you.